Karen burst through the hospital's glass doors, her designer purse swinging furiously as she stomped toward the reception desk. Her perfectly coiffed hair and expertly applied makeup were the only things that seemed in order as she radiated an aura of pure rage. Unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable, she shrieked, slamming her perfectly manicured hands down on the counter, nearly knocking over the vase of fresh flowers that sat pristinely in the corner. The poor receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, looked up from her computer screen with wide, startled eyes. Ma'am, how can I help you? She stammered, her voice wavering. Help me? How can you help me? Karen spat, her nostrils flaring. You can start by explaining why my facial appointment was canceled at the last minute. I had that scheduled for weeks, and I will not stand for this kind of incompetence. Chloe swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she tried to pull up the appointment information on her screen. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems there was a scheduling conflict, and... A scheduling conflict. Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. I don't care about your silly scheduling conflicts. I'm Karen Donovan, and I demand to be seen immediately. Where is the manager? The poor receptionist shrunk back, her face flushing with embarrassment and anxiety. The manager is in a meeting right now, but I can try to. Try. Karen scoffed, cutting her off again. I don't have time for your trying. This is an outrage, and I will not leave until I speak to the manager personally. Do you have any idea who I am? Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a security guard approached, his brow furrowed with concern. Is there a problem here? He asked, eyeing Karen warily. Karen whirled around, her eyes narrowing dangerously. A problem? Yes, there's a problem. This incompetent receptionist canceled my facial appointment, and I demand to speak to the manager immediately. The security guard glanced at Chloe, who looked like she was about to burst into tears, then back at Karen. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down and step aside. If you have an issue, I can try to get the manager for you, but you need to lower your voice and stop disturbing the other patients. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red, and for a moment, Chloe thought she might actually explode. Calm down, she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. How dare you tell me to calm down? Do you have any idea who I am? I am Karen Donovan, and I will not be. But her rant was cut short as the security guard firmly grasped her arm and began to escort her towards the exit. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises if you can't calm down and speak to us respectfully. Karen's eyes went wide with shock and outrage, and she struggled against the guard's grip, her purse swinging wildly. Let go of me, she screeched. You can't do this to me. I'm calling my lawyer. As the security guard firmly guided the irate woman out the door, Chloe let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened, and she knew this was only the beginning of Karen's entitled rampage. Karen burst through the hospital's glass doors, her designer purse swinging furiously as she stomped toward the reception desk. Her perfectly coiffed hair and expertly applied makeup were the only things that seemed in order as she radiated an aura of pure rage. Unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable, she shrieked, slamming her perfectly manicured hands down on the counter, nearly knocking over the vase of fresh flowers that sat pristinely in the corner. The poor receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, looked up from her computer screen with wide, startled eyes. Ma'am, how can I help you? She stammered, her voice wavering. Help me? How can you help me? Karen spat, her nostrils flaring. You can start by explaining why my facial appointment was canceled at the last minute. I had that scheduled for weeks, and I will not stand for this kind of incompetence. Chloe swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she tried to pull up the appointment information on her screen. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems there was a scheduling conflict, and... A scheduling conflict, Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. I don't care about your silly scheduling conflicts. I'm Karen Donovan, and I demand to be seen immediately. Where is the manager? The poor receptionist shrunk back, her face flushing with embarrassment and anxiety. The manager is in a meeting right now, but I can try to. Try. Karen scoffed, cutting her off again. I don't have time for your trying. This is an outrage, and I will not leave until I speak to the manager personally. Do you have any idea who I am? Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a security guard approached, his brow furrowed with concern. Is there a problem here? He asked, eyeing Karen warily. Karen whirled around, her eyes narrowing dangerously. A problem? Yes, there's a problem. This incompetent receptionist canceled my facial appointment, and I demand to speak to the manager immediately. The security guard glanced at Chloe, who looked like she was about to burst into tears, then back at Karen. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down and step aside. If you have an issue, I can try to get the manager for you, but you need to lower your voice and stop disturbing the other patients. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red, and for a moment, Chloe thought she might actually explode. Calm down, she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. How dare you tell me to calm down? Do you have any idea who I am? I am Karen Donovan, and I will not be. But her rant was cut short as the security guard firmly grasped her arm and began to escort her towards the exit. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises if you can't calm down and speak to us respectfully. Karen's eyes went wide with shock and outrage, and she struggled against the guard's grip, her purse swinging wildly. Let go of me, she screeched. You can't do this to me. I'm calling my lawyer. As the security guard firmly guided the irate woman out the door, Chloe let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened, and she knew this was only the beginning of Karen's entitled rampage. As Karen sped away from the hospital, her mind was racing with plans for retribution. She couldn't believe the audacity of that security guard, daring to manhandle her and threaten to call the police. The nerve of him. And the pathetic receptionist, cowering in fear instead of standing up for a valued donor like herself. They would all pay for this outrage. The first step, of course, was to call her lawyer. Karen fumbled with her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling with rage as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed to make sure that guard was fired, and that the hospital faced serious consequences for their blatant disrespect. Brian, it's Karen, she practically shouted into the phone as soon as her lawyer answered. I've just been humiliated at the hospital, and I need you to take immediate action. Brian, a seasoned attorney used to dealing with Karen's frequent outbursts, sighed heavily. All right, Karen, calm down and tell me what happened. Karen proceeded to recount the incident in excruciatingly dramatic detail, sparing no hyperbole as she described the outrageous and unacceptable treatment she had endured. By the time she was finished, Brian's head was pounding. Okay, Karen, I understand you're upset, but you need to take a deep breath, he said, trying to interject some reason into the conversation. Let's start by reaching out to the hospital administration and... No, Brian, this isn't something that can be handled with a simple phone call, Karen interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. That security guard physically manhandled me, and the receptionist was utterly incompetent. I want them both fired, and I want the hospital to issue a public apology. This is an outrage that cannot be swept under the rug. Brian pinched the bridge of his nose, already anticipating the headache that was to come. I'll see what I can do, Karen, but you need to understand that we can't just bully our way through this. We'll need to approach it through proper legal channels. Proper legal channels, Karen scoffed. Brian, you know as well as I do that my family's influence can get this resolved much more quickly. I want that guard fired by the end of the day, and I want the hospital to grovel at my feet for forgiveness. Karen, I really don't think. Brian began, but Karen cut him off again. I don't care what you think, Brian. I pay you to handle these kinds of situations, and that's exactly what I expect you to do. Call in every favor, pull every string, do whatever it takes. This is war, and I'm going to win. With that, Karen ended the call, already moving on to her next step. She scrolled through her contacts, pausing on the number of her closest friend, Samantha. Samantha was the wife of a prominent local politician, and she had a knack for wielding her husband's influence to get what she wanted. Samantha, it's Karen, she said as her friend answered. I need your help. The hospital has just committed an unforgivable offense against me, and I need to mobilize our social network to set things right. As Karen laid out the details of her ordeal, Samantha's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and gleeful anticipation. Oh, my dear, this is simply unacceptable, she cooed, her voice dripping with sympathetic outrage. Don't you worry, Karen. I'll make sure the entire town hears about this travesty. We'll have the hospital begging for your forgiveness before the day is out. Karen smiled, her anger momentarily subsiding as she felt the power of her social connections rallying to her defense. This was going to be a battle, but she was confident that with Samantha's help and the full force of her family's influence, she would emerge victorious. No one crossed Karen Donovan and got away with it. As Karen's call with Samantha ended, she felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. The wheels were in motion, and soon the entire town would know of the hospital's egregious mistreatment of one of its most prominent and generous benefactors. Karen Donovan was not a woman to be trifled with, and she would make sure the hospital staff learned that lesson the hard way. With renewed determination, Karen dialed another number on her phone. This time, it was her close friend and confidant, Isabel. Isabel's husband happened to sit on the hospital's board of directors, and Karen knew she could leverage that connection to maximum effect. Isabel, darling, it's Karen, she said, injecting just the right amount of wounded indignation into her voice. I'm afraid I've had a dreadful experience at the hospital, and I desperately need your help. Isabel, ever the loyal friend, immediately responded with concern. Karen, what on earth happened? Are you all right? Karen proceeded to recount the incident in dramatic detail, painting herself as the innocent victim of gross incompetence and disrespect. I'm simply beside myself, Isabel, she lamented. That security guard had the audacity to manhandle me and threatened to call the police. And the receptionist, she was utterly useless. I'm absolutely mortified, and I need your help to make this right. Isabel listened with growing outrage, her own sense of entitlement and privilege being stoked by Karen's vivid description of the events. That is simply unacceptable, she exclaimed. Don't you worry, Karen. I'll have a word with my husband. He'll make sure the hospital administration knows exactly how unacceptable this was. Oh, Isabel, you're a godsend, Karen gushed, feigning relief. I don't know what I'd do without you and Samantha in my corner. This needs to be addressed immediately. I simply won't stand for this level of disrespect. Consider it done, my dear, Isabel assured her. I'll be on the phone with my husband as soon as we hang up. We'll have those incompetent fools begging for your forgiveness. Karen smiled, her teeth gleaming with triumph. Thank you, Isabel. I knew I could count on you. I'll be sure to let Samantha know that you're on the case as well. As she ended the call, Karen felt a surge of power coursing through her. With the combined influence of Samantha and Isabel, there was no way the hospital could withstand the onslaught that was about to descend upon them. Karen Donovan was a force to be reckoned with, and she was determined to teach these lowly hospital staff a lesson they would never forget. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as Karen's allies sprang into action. Samantha began flooding the local news outlets and social media with tales of Karen's mistreatment, while Isabel leveraged her husband's connections to pressure the hospital's administration. The once peaceful hospital was now the center of a brewing storm, and Karen sat back, reveling in the knowledge that her revenge was well underway. As news of Karen Donovan's confrontation with the hospital staff spread like wildfire through the local community, the hospital's administration found themselves in a precarious position. Isabel's husband, a powerful figure on the board of directors, had wasted no time in relaying the disturbing details to the hospital's CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Russo. Dr. Russo, a seasoned professional who typically maintained a calm and composed demeanor, felt a growing sense of dread as the gravity of the situation set in. Karen Donovan was not just any disgruntled patient. She was a major donor whose family's influence and deep pockets had propped up the hospital's operations for years. Angering her could have disastrous consequences. Summoning the hospital's PR manager and head of security, Dr. Russo convened an emergency meeting to assess the damage control needed. "I'm sure you're both aware of the incident that occurred earlier today involving Mrs. Donovan," she began, her brow furrowed with concern. "Needless to say, this is a serious situation that requires our immediate attention." The PR manager, a savvy and experienced woman named Samantha, nodded grimly. "Yes, Dr. Russo, we've already started fielding calls from the local media outlets. It seems Mrs. Donovan's close friends have been quite vocal in their outrage over her treatment." The security guard, a burly man named Jack, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I was the one who had to escort Mrs. Donovan from the premises," he admitted. "I tried to de-escalate the situation, but she was completely unwilling to cooperate." Dr. Russo sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I understand, Jack, and I don't fault you for your actions. Given the circumstances, you handled it as well as you could have. However, the fallout from this is going to be significant, and we need to get ahead of it." Samantha cleared her throat, her gaze steely. "Dr. Russo, we need to issue a public apology to Mrs. Donovan immediately. Preferably one that includes a commitment to review our policies and procedures to ensure this doesn't happen again." Jack frowned, his brow furrowing. "But ma'am, surely we can't just capitulate to Mrs. Donovan's demands. She was clearly in the wrong, and—" Dr. Russo raised a hand, cutting him off. "I understand your concerns, Jack, but we can't afford to alienate a donor of Mrs. Donovan's stature. The hospital simply can't survive the kind of financial fallout that would result from her withdrawing her support." Samantha nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We need to do whatever it takes to quell this situation before it spirals out of control. A public apology, a donation matching campaign, whatever it takes to get Mrs. Donovan back on our side." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Dr. Russo fixed him with a stern look. "I'm sorry, Jack, but the decision has been made. We need to protect the hospital's interests, and that means bowing to Mrs. Donovan's demands, no matter how unreasonable they may be." With a reluctant nod, Jack conceded, his jaw set in a hard line. The hospital was putting its principles aside in the face of a powerful donor's wrath, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease about the precedent this was setting. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Russo couldn't help but wonder if they were making a terrible mistake. But with the specter of financial ruin looming, she knew they had little choice but to capitulate to Karen Donovan's demands, no matter how egregious they might be. As the hospital administration scrambled to contain the fallout from Karen Donovan's outburst, the woman herself was basking in the glow of her impending victory. She knew that her network of influential friends would not rest until the hospital had been suitably humbled and made to grovel at her feet. True to form, it wasn't long before Karen received a call from Isabel, her voice laden with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. "Karen, darling, I have some news," Isabel said, her words coming out in a rush. "My husband just got off the phone with the hospital's CEO, and they're willing to issue a full public apology to you." Karen's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "Well, it's about time they saw reason," she said, leaning back in her chair. "And what else?" Isabel hesitated for a moment, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They've also agreed to match your latest donation and to hold a special ceremony honoring your contributions to the hospital." Karen's eyes widened, and she sat up straight, her manicured nails drumming against the polished surface of her desk. That's a good start, I suppose, she mused, her mind already whirring with even more outlandish demands. But I think we can do better than that, don't you? Better? Isabel echoed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Karen, I really think. Nonsense, Isabel, Karen interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. If they want to make this right, they're going to have to go above and beyond. I want a gala in my honor, with the entire hospital board in attendance. And I want a full-page ad in the local newspaper, thanking me for my invaluable contributions to their institution. Isabel let out a nervous chuckle. Karen, that's quite a lot. I'm not sure the hospital will agree to. They will agree to it, Isabel, Karen interjected, her voice hardening. Because if they don't, I will make sure that every single penny they've ever received from my family will dry up. And I'll see to it that their precious reputation is dragged through the mud until they're begging for mercy. Isabel swallowed hard, her resolve wavering. I see. Well, I'll relay your demands to my husband, and we'll see what we can do. Excellent, Karen purred, her mood lightening once more. I knew I could count on you, Isabel. This is going to be a day to remember, I can already tell. As Isabel ended the call, she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had no doubt that Karen would make good on her threats if the hospital failed to meet her outrageous demands. And with the CEO and board already eager to appease the powerful donor, there was little chance of them pushing back against her escalating requests. Isabel sighed, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. This was going to be a long and arduous battle, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for the role she was playing in enabling Karen's entitled behavior. But with her own social standing and influence at stake, she knew there was no turning back now. True to Karen's demands, the hospital administration quickly sprang into action, scrambling to organize a lavish gala in her honor. Despite the misgivings of some staff members, the CEO and board knew they had little choice but to acquiesce to the powerful donor's escalating requests. On the night of the event, the hospital's ballroom was decked out in shimmering elegance, with a massive banner bearing Karen's name hanging prominently over the stage. As the hospital's elite guests filtered in, the atmosphere was tense, with many exchanging uneasy glances and hushed whispers. Karen, of course, made a grand entrance, sweeping into the room with an entourage of her closest friends, including Isabel and Samantha. She was dressed to the nines, her designer gown and sparkling jewelry making her the undisputed center of attention. As the program began, the hospital's CEO, Dr. Russo, took the stage, her smile strained as she delivered a glowing tribute to Karen's generosity and unwavering support. With each passing minute, the audience's discomfort grew palpable, and it was clear that many were uncomfortable with the blatant pandering. When it came time for Karen to address the crowd, she took the stage with a self-satisfied smirk, basking in the adulation of the hospital's staff and board members. Her speech was a masterful display of false humility and calculated gratitude, laced with subtle jabs at the incompetence that had led to her original confrontation. By the time she finished, the audience erupted into thunderous applause, their clapping more out of fear than genuine appreciation. Karen soaked it all in, her eyes gleaming with triumph as she surveyed the room, knowing that she had well and truly broken the hospital's spirit. As the gala wound down, Karen made a point of cornering Dr. Russo, her expression hardening. I hope you understand, Dr. Russo, that this is only the beginning, she murmured, her voice low and threatening. I expect to see continued improvements in the hospital's customer service, as well as a more proactive approach to addressing the concerns of our most generous donors. Dr. Russo swallowed hard, her composure wavering. Of course, Mrs. Donovan. You have my word that we will do everything in our power to ensure your complete satisfaction going forward. Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. See that you do, she purred, patting the doctor's arm condescendingly. because if I'm ever treated with anything less than the utmost respect and deference, I can assure you that the consequences will be quite severe." With that, Karen turned on her heel and swept out of the ballroom, leaving a trail of unease and resentment in her wake. The hospital staff and board members exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that they had been irrevocably cowed by the force of Karen's unrelenting entitlement. In the weeks that followed the lavish gala honoring Karen Donovan, the hospital staff found themselves walking on eggshells, constantly on the alert for any potential misstep that could incur the wrath of the powerful donor. Dr. Russo, the embattled CEO, found herself spending an inordinate amount of time placating Karen and her circle of influential friends, approving one outrageous demand after another. From VIP parking spots to exclusive access to the hospital's most cutting-edge treatments, Karen's sense of entitlement knew no bounds. The once respected institution had been transformed into a shadow of its former self, its principles and standards sacrificed on the altar of Karen's insatiable ego. The staff, once proud of their commitment to excellent patient care, now dreaded the sight of the Donovan family name, knowing that any deviation from Karen's expectations would be met with swift and merciless retaliation. But as the months passed, a curious thing began to happen. The hospital's reputation, once a source of pride for the community, started to deteriorate. Patients began to complain about the subpar care they were receiving, and the hospital's once stellar ratings began to plummet. Whispers of the Donovan family's outsized influence and the administration's capitulation to their demands began to circulate, casting a dark shadow over the institution's integrity. Donors, appalled by the hospital's willingness to compromise its values, began to withdraw their support, leaving the hospital in increasingly dire financial straits. It was then that the true cost of Karen's victory became apparent. As the hospital struggled to stay afloat, Dr. Russo found herself at the center of a growing scandal. Her leadership and decision-making called into question by the board of directors and the community at large. Karen, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the havoc she had wreaked, basking in the glow of her perceived triumph. But as the hospital's downward spiral continued, even she could not escape the consequences of her actions. One day, as Karen arrived at the hospital for a routine checkup, she was met with a sight that chilled her to the core. The once gleaming facility was in disrepair, the corridors bustling with anxious patients and frazzled staff. And when she approached the reception desk, she found, to her horror, that the young woman she had so mercilessly berated was no longer there. In her place stood a stoic-faced security guard, who eyed Karen with a mixture of pity and disdain. "I'm afraid I can't help you, ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of any semblance of deference. "The hospital is closing its doors for good at the end of the week." Karen's world came crashing down around her as the gravity of her actions finally sank in. In her quest for dominance and entitlement, she had single-handedly brought about the downfall of the very institution she had claimed support. And now, with nowhere left to turn, she found herself facing the ultimate reckoning, the karmic consequences of her own unbridled arrogance. As she stumbled out of the hospital, her designer heels clacking against the cracked pavement, Karen Donovan knew, in the depths of her soul, that her reign of terror had come to a bitter and resounding end.